So now when you finish your training at heavy conversion and you ended up in a squadron, you're posted to Middle and St. George, and you end up at a squadron called 419, and 428 squadron is the other one. And you get to know everybody. You get to, and a lot of my friends from the very beginning ended up there too. So it turned over quite well. We lived in Nissen huts and tin huts and all the rest. But it was a great school, a great squadron, quite happy. Food was good. We all got along. We all had lots of leave, I know. But that's how I ended up in 419 Squadron. 428 was the other one. And the CO of 428 was Chester Hull. He ended up Lieutenant General, Deputy Chief in Ottawa. Got to know him very well. A DFC winner. But he was tough on 428. You had to be on time and on target. You better be, because it saved everybody's life. Yeah. But he was good. Got to know him very well post-war. He became a good friend. And squadron life is quite different, of course. You're learning everywhere along the line, you're learning something new. It wasn't the same as your initial navigation. The war evolved so quickly from 1939 to 44. The modern technologies, particularly in navigation and bombing, Mark 14, every bit as good as any of the Americans had. Excellent, beautiful machine. It did everything. You put a lot of statistics on them and let it do its work. Actually, you could bomb if the aircraft was like this. It was so versatile. The Americans bragged about the northern bomb sight, but this is every bit as good. I'm not going to knock the Americans. That was a different world for them. But there was some criticisms you hear along the line, but not from us. But it was in the air that it was tremendous training. I'll never forget the training we got. The new equipment, radar G for navigation, H2S, which was a television set. It was, you'd be up there 2 hours, you'd be really sweating, learning how to operate these new pieces of equipment. I thought I'd never learn, but I did. You know, and you're up there for 2 hours and you come down wringing wet from the effort, but it paid off. And we had great instructors. They gave you a tremendous amount of confidence in what you could do. They were ex-school teachers and everything else. They weren't just ordinary. But you met a lot of good instructors who had just finished their tours, and you used them, and they were good too. Bombing leaders, just maybe DFC types, navigators. Mike Ken Reed, he just got his DFC, and he became a navigation leader on the operational training units, that sort of thing. But I think it was the instructions we had gave us a tremendous amount of confidence in what we could do. And that's what we learned. I credit the Air Force instructors. It had to be entirely different from 1939 to 44, 45, 43, 44, 45. It was the exceptional instruction we had to survive. The tone of the war, but it was still extreme. We're still losing people, but it's the confidence, I think. Others have said the same thing, who survived that heavy year, 43, 44, yeah. Oh, that was in April. Oh, well, we went on a penny raid, you know, a diversion in the middle of March. About 100 training aircraft. We would go into a certain lot long near the German border over France. It was to draw, and what we did on those trips, I would be shoveling tinsel out the parachute every minute and a half to make it appear as if another raid is coming by thousands of aircraft. But we were going in another direction where, say, the main force was going. So that was the middle of March. And we dropped these tinsels to pick up the radar and try to draw up the night fighters towards us and not the main force. And then and I used my the navigator was a bit confused because I wasn't able to help him, but I turned on the television set, or the H2S we call it, and I could pick up the outline of Paris and Cherbourg Peninsula. And when they started firing at us at the Cherbourg, and the Jersey and Guernsey Islands, they were still occupied, I was quite happy. My navigation was pretty good. I knew where we were, you know, that sort of thing. Our first I only had 2 operations, so I'm really not in a bragging. You can't. I feel badly about it when I'm with guys that have had 35 trips or 30 trips and suffered all this flack, and I only had 2 trips. The first one was a 10-hour, 15 trip to an oil factory, an oil refinery down in Merseburg beyond Leipzig. 10-hour trip, terrible trip. It was a terrible trip, really. And that's where I first encountered flak, but I was navigating, I found out we were being towed ahead by a 90 mile an hour jet stream. It wasn't called a jet stream then, but we were shoved ahead by a 90 mile an hour wind, which made we were going early on the target, so we had to zigzag to take up time. But that's dangerous too, because you've got 300 some odd aircraft coming along with you doing the same thing. It's a risk of running into each other. And we arrived over the target too early. The pathfinders had just come in to mark the target. And the skipper says, well, we'll orbit the target. Okay, orbit. My eyes then, I'm up front in the bombing position. My eyes were fully extended because you're doing an orbit. What are the other 300 some odd aircraft doing? Where are they? You're flying at night, no lights. That's when your accidents happen. So we orbited the target. So we came in on it again, just as the pathfinders were marking it. So I bombed in it, in that position, but I did hit it. And I ignored the flak. I didn't know what flak looked like then anyway. So on the way home, we're running into the same wind against us. After 7 hours, the navigator, he couldn't do any more. He was so goddamn tired. He was a fussy guy, Olanowski. He was a good navigator, but he worried too much. He worried himself tired. So that meant I had to navigate the whole thing for the next 3 hours. Now we're running out of fuel. It's raining. skipper says, we're running out of fuel. I said, Skipper, call in now. They don't know where the hell we are coming into the base, the aerodrome. I said, call in now. We won't have to do an orbit. You know, when the aircraft were coming back, they used to have to circle the aerodrome to land. I said, call in now, and I'll put the end of the runway on my G set, my navigation set. I could pinpoint the end of the runway on my navigation equipment. I said, I'll bring him in to the end of the runway. I think I was stupid, really, when I think about it. It's pouring rain, but I brought him in to the end of the runway in the rainstorm, and it worked. But when we went over on reunions, and I'm with a top pilot and a navigator, all decorated, I looked at the hills around me. I said, geez, if I'd made the wrong navigation piece of it, if I put the wrong strobe on that end of the runway, I'm dead. But it worked. And I think the skipper appreciated it. It's not, all this is not in a bragging sense. It's just a job we had to do. And we all did it well, as far as I'm concerned. So that was that. But on the briefing, the intelligence officers, I never drank, so I gave my rum ration away to the skipper. I said to him, they're going to ask me what the flak was like. I have the foggiest idea. You've seen it all over Italy and Germany. He says, oh, it's just moderate. What you saw was just moderate. Okay, that's fine. That's a beginning. So, you have a coffee and no rum because I didn't like it. And you sit down. You go to the mess and you sit down. And it's interesting, the reaction of the crews. There's somebody playing a piano. There are a couple sitting in the soft chairs, and that's all they're doing, is just sitting, relaxing. And the pianist doing his thing, he's relaxing. But there's no discussion, no talk. It's just a pleasant time and a relaxing time. And then you have a meal. They have a meal set aside for you of bacon and eggs and a treat. But that was it. That's the first trip. Now the second trip, we briefed for Hamburg two times. We finished that April trip on the 4th, and now we're briefed a couple more times for Hamburg, but it didn't come about because of weather and everything else. But that's when the excitement begins. It's a tremendous atmosphere when your navigators and pilots and bombers and navigators and pilots are sitting at a table and you're being briefed. You go through the intelligence and navigators and bombers, and when the CO opens the curtain and says the target for tonight, you know, but he didn't pronounce the name Hamburg. He didn't need to. He just gave the Latin long for the target. We knew from the previous briefings, 2 nights in a row. We knew the Latin long of Hamburg and every other place. We didn't need to say, you know, you hear the American and the target for tonight. He didn't do it that way. You'd think that would be done in Hollywood, I guess. But they did it. The ribbons showed it on the big screen, the ribbons. Oh. That's when excitement begins. It needs amazing, amazing atmosphere. The groans, the chatter. No, not that target. They'll know we're coming because we've been briefed on it now for 2 nights in a row. And this is the 3rd night. They'll be waiting for us. That was the attitude of the bulk of those listening to the briefings of the intelligence. And when the intelligence people say, no, the anti-aircraft are just the same. They haven't changed over the years. So now you know what to expect. They say they're not little old women, but there were women operating those 88s and others. It's fascinating, the feeling that goes around in the room. And the young people ask me sometimes, what about fear? I said, no. Extreme apprehension and excitement. It's not, you can't call it fear. You hear some of the Army guys talk about fear. Well, theirs was a different war than ours. We've talked about it. I've talked about it a lot, about fear. Anyway, extreme apprehension. The kids will ask me that. And I turn it back on them. The last time I was with the kids at R.J. Sinclair, I said, who plays hockey? Well, a group of them. And the oldest one, I said, have you been in any playoff games? Yeah, I have. What was your stomach like before you got on the ice? He said, oh, I was upset. My stomach was turning over. I thought I'd be sick. What happened after you got in the game, after you got playing? Oh, I was fine. I said, now you've answered it. Now you've answered it. Extreme apprehension. It was the same when we stepped on board the aircraft. But I said, after we got going, everything fine. We had a lot of work to do. And I asked some of my friends, decorated friends, the same thing. Bill Stephen, the one that won the DSO. I said, what, Bill? What about fear? He says, I didn't have time. I didn't have time. And same in Napanee, won the DFM, immediate DFM. He says, I didn't have time. All I wanted to do is save the crew. And he did. But there was no fear, he said. That seemed to be the common. You're so damn busy doing your job. You didn't have time for fear. That's my feeling. And I was concerned about that. But that was the answer I got. And I talked to Hamish Mahady and the others who were in the first bombing raids of the war and the last. I talked to my friend, he was a mid-upper gunner in Halifax, on the Nuremberg raid in the end of March. I think you may know that raid, where we lost 94, 95 aircraft. He was a mid-upper gunner, and he was counting the aircraft he saw shot down. At the 38th, the skipper said, no more, Bill, no more. He didn't want to demoralize the crew. No more. He said, don't tell me anymore. But they survived. Yet my neighbor, who was a navigator in Halifax, I asked Ken, what did you see? I saw nothing. I said, he must have been in the first of the group going in. He said, I saw nothing. He also ended up with the DFC. my hockey buddy and skiing buddy. Yeah. Next door neighbor practically. So these were the reactions that the kids. That's how I get the kids to understand what it was like. But over your navigation is tremendous, really. They really schooled us well. You know, I could plot everything on the Mercator's projection, like lots and longs and everything else, and timing. And it really goes well with the training we got. And on that particular day, on the 8th, I can remember very vividly that we were very busy, we were on time, but we were having trouble with that starboard inner engine all the way. The skipper did let them know that was in trouble, but I said, you'll be court-martialed if you break radio silence. But he did, and I think he had the right to do it. And he was right. But they nursed that starboard inner on the way, but it's the one that caught on fire over the target. But it happens that everybody's so busy. I heard it all, but I'm busy watching Pathfinders marking the target. But I'm looking down and I can see the 88s coming up at me. I can see the searchlights, I can see the puffs of smoke of the other anti-aircraft fire. I can see the flares below me. It's all hell breaking loose. There are hundreds and hundreds of guns firing up at you. And then the starboard engine's on fire, but I didn't worry about that because you've got a flight engineer and a pilot and know what they're doing. They put it out quietly, you know, simply. They do it. And still carry on. And then the target's bombed, bombs away. And I looked up, 11 o'clock high, I could see a fighter flare. I informed the skipper, 11 o'clock high, fighter flare. But that's all. You just inform. Now we're losing altitude. We've got to do that to avoid the night fighters. We're going down to a lower level. When the starboard outer goes on fire, we don't know why. Could be flak, could be anything. But that's put out. The aircraft should have flown, but it was steadily losing air at a height. We're now down to about 3,000–4,000 feet when the skipper says, what are your thoughts? I said, Skipper, if we go southwest, we run into the high Tatras. They're over 3,000 feet. We're now down to 3,000 feet. I said, if we go west, Essen in the Ruhr Valley is still occupied. I always went into the intelligence room and read every newspaper and every report, so I knew where the armies were. That was just my peculiarity. And the skipper was glad I did. Anyway, I always like to know where the hell we were going and what's going to, or afterwards. So I said, we go west, that won't be very good. We go northwest, we'll run into the Canadian Army diver gun belts where their anti-aircraft fire are radar operated 3,000 feet against the flying bombs they were sending over London. They came in at about 3,000 feet, so they automatically fired at anything below 3,000 feet. That wouldn't be any good. And Holland, many parts of Holland were still occupied. I didn't relish going into the North Sea because I didn't like swimming that much. So that's when we made this. And the skipper said to me, he just quietly said to me, there's just two of us talking. There's no one else talking, just two. Me and the pilot. We're in charge. And not in a bragging sense. It's just the way it is. And skipper said, I'd like to get out of this, quietly, on the intercom. Could you tie my rudder down to correct for the pull of the two port engines? Because he had terrible pressure on us to keep it level. I said, okay, I used some string from the window, the tinsel, but I wasn't too happy about it. But I asked the flight engineer to sacrifice his helmet. And I'll show you what I asked him to do, because I wasn't happy about the cord. So I asked him for this. I asked him for his helmet. What I did was use this to tie down the pedal of his, so his foot wouldn't be cramped. And that worked. I was able to tie the pedal down with this intercommunication cord, and it worked. I was happy with it, and so was he. And then, when all that got sorted out, we're now down to about 2,000 feet, and that's not a good place to be. So we're prepared to abandon aircraft, and I'm in front in the bomber position. I'm the one who pulls up the hatch for the escape. And that's now we're down to about 2,000 feet. I think the book, the history book, says about 2,500 feet. But I remember the navigator saying 2,000 feet. And I pulled the hatch up. It's not very big. And I decided to go out front. I'm the leader. I'm supposed to go first, followed by the navigator, wireless operator, flight engineer, and the pilot last. The gunners go out the back door. And the skipper gave me the okay to go and, bail out. And I took a header. I went out like diving off a high board, because I didn't want to hit the tailplane, because I only counted to 3. You're supposed to count to about 7. But we were so low, I figured I can't count to 7. I'd better do it at 3. And I did. I took a header out, like diving off a high board, and I pulled the cord, pulled that thing there, and it was quite a jolt. I think what I remember most was the extreme quiet, how quiet it was when I got out. And of course I'm tumbling head first, and I have to correct that with my shrouds. You practice that anyway on the ground. And I landed on my back on the roof of a tall roof of a small outbuilding, about 10 inches from the edge of the building. My parachute wrapped around the chimney. And it's a strange, and I heard the aircraft crash ahead of me and saw it burn. I didn't think the pilot had time to get out, to tell you the truth, because it all happens in seconds. Actually, it's 7 seconds takes you to get out of the aircraft. Totally. Anyway, I saw it burn. But it's strange what you're thinking in the brief time you're in the air. I've told Mr. Wash next door about his friend dying in the last days of the war. And I'm in the same position. I don't know where we are. am I going to survive? And then you fatly land on the roof of the tile roof on your flat of your back, and 10 inches from the edge. So far, so good. But it's strange what you think too. I hope the aircraft didn't crash into a farmhouse and kill some kid or something. Here I'm worrying about killing somebody, and I've just dropped 14,000 pounds of dynamite in the Blom and Voss shipyards. You know, that sort of thing. Yet I was worried about, did that aircraft crash? And every time I think of my nephew at the University of Toronto said, well, I can send a crew over and find out where the crash site is. I said, Gary, what if that aircraft did hit a house? And I'd be concerned about it. He said, we can locate it if you want it. I know where it is, but I didn't pursue it. Jumped down off the roof, 10 feet, 10:35 at night. I heard the mid-upper gunner whistle. We carried these whistles hooked onto that. I still have mine, and I replied with mine. We had code numbers. His was 2, and I replied with mine. And I walked up to the tree he was hiding behind. I said, come on out from behind the tree, Curly. And that's when we had a few, I had to laugh at that one, really, because I heard a little chatter on the intercom. The skipper wasn't happy about it, between the rear gunner and the mid-upper gunner. I said, Curly, he's a newfie type, nearly bald. I said, Curly, what was that all about with the rear gunner? He said, well, he had my hat in the turret, in the rear turret, and I wanted him to bring it with him. I didn't want to catch cold. So that's a few laughs. I didn't want to catch cold. It was a beautiful night. I just wore the battle dress and a shirt and tie and a sweater. That's all. But we had a good. We hit his parachute. I left mine on the roof. I wasn't going to take any chance falling off the roof trying to get it off. So somebody must have made a good dress or something out of it. And we hit his parachute, and off we went, walking, which I figured would be in the right direction. We had lots of compasses in our escape kits, so that was no problem of going in a certain direction. We heard at 2:30 in the morning, we heard a lot of trucks coming. We didn't know whether they were searching for us, whether they were good or bad. So we hid in a ditch. We spread eagled over a water ditch and tried to get out our flying suit covering us. But I didn't want to look up because I wasn't certain whether they were good guys or bad guys. And even if they're good guys, we'd still get shot because they wouldn't know who we were. So we stayed right there until the convoy went by. We weren't certain. You're never certain. You weren't certain whether you're in no man's land or enemy territory or what. Are they searching for you? What do? You keep on going. You take off your rank, take that off, take this off. I hid it and kept on my way. I saw, about a little later, saw a shed we could perhaps hide in, but I pulled a board across and I unleashed about a cord of wood, and that wasn't very good to hide there. Then we were coming through a village, about 5:30 in the morning. We saw all these bed sheets hanging out of windows and doors, and I said, oh, I think we're maybe a bit lucky. These are surrender flags. And the Navy air gunner, again Curly, being a sailor, he climbed up the flag post in the middle of the village and took the bed sheet down out off the top and brought it down. And that's the bed sheet over there. We eventually cut it in half, and I have the one half with the string attached and whatnot. He was risking himself going up that flagpole, but it was a big flagpole. Somebody, one of the colonels, said, why didn't you knock on the door and take their surrender? I said, yeah, I might have got shot too. Anyway, that's where we felt we were in better position. We thought we may be lucky. We might be home free. Anyway, we kept on going, and we heard some, I'd say about 6:30 in the morning, we heard lots of motor noise. We figured it was a motor pool. Maybe tanks and trucks were warming up, but we still didn't know whether they're the good guys or the bad guys. And certainly we wouldn't go near the motor pool, we'd get shot. So we found a barn, not that far away, off the highway, and we hid in the barn. But before we went upstairs into the loft in the straw, we took a few of the fresh eggs that were just laid, and we had a breakfast of raw eggs, and we broke into our escape kits and had some high protein biscuits and a chocolate bar and some Horlicks tablets, and we had a good breakfast. And then when we were tucking down under the straw, which would be a good place to hide, but it was now getting light, and I was able to lift the tile on the roof of the barn, and I could see outside. I could see the farmer coming out towards the barn, but he turned around. He may have suspected somebody in there, and he turned around, but he didn't have any gun. You worry about some of these farmers with their guns. We'd heard they were shooting any airmen coming down. In any case, we were able to lift the tile and look at the road. When I saw the stars on the sides of the vehicles, the tanks and trucks, that was on all the Allied vehicles had the star on the side of the vehicles, so our identification. I said, oh boy, we're home free. We made it. And we could see all the refugees. We went down onto the road and walked with hundreds and hundreds of refugees, German, carrying all sorts of things, kids. I don't know where they were coming from or where they were going. But we stopped at a crossroads and talked to an army service policeman, and he believed us and summoned a jeep and took us through the city of Osnabrück, which I think had been liberated the day before, and took us to the British 2nd Army headquarters in a kindergarten. I can remember the sign, kindergarten, and in a tent. And now it's getting on to about 8 o'clock in the morning. And we were interviewed by a major of the British 2nd Army and quizzing us where we came from and what we did. And we convinced him where we come from, and he said, well, take a look at this tent. And 3 feet above the floor of the tent were a lot of holes all around. He said, the Hitler Youth shot this place up last night, and you've walked through their territory and minefields, and I think I'd better keep you out of trouble. So we summoned another jeep, and off we went to another forward air base, a small grass field. But we went through by the Dortmund Ems Canal, which I knew had been emptied a couple of days earlier, and through Rhine, the village of Rhine, the one building left. It had been liberated the day before, and I saw some red stuff in the one building that was left. So I told the driver to stop, and I went in and picked up a bunch of flags with swastikas on them. And I came out of that building and was met by another policeman and asked me what I was doing in there, and I told him. He said, well, you're lucky. He says, guess why they're all there? He said, that place is booby-trapped. You could be blown up. And my driver on the Jeep said, look, I think you better get on board and we're going to take you where you're supposed to go instead of getting killed. So that's why we ended up at a forward air base. It was a grass field. I was met at the aerodrome by a well-dressed airman with a stripe on his sleeve, an Air Commodore. He looked important. And it was a forward grass strip. And they flew those light aircraft, the Oster aircraft. And they were spotter aircraft. They were used to smoke out, look for enemy positions to help the artillery of the British Second Army to fire on the other enemy positions. That's what those aircraft were used for. However, the Air Commodore said, would you like to go to Holland with me? I said, yes, sir. Mid-upper gunner said he wasn't going to walk anymore, and I decided I didn't want to walk anymore. I didn't want to walk anymore. I wanted to fly. Anyway, we took off down the Rhine River, and he said, be careful, it's still not safe. So we keep your eyes open, and we flew down the Rhine River, and we saw where the 2 weeks earlier the bridges had been built over, pontoon bridges over where the Canadian air paratroopers landed on the other side of the Rhine River. And he said, I'll show you some of our work over the Typhoons, the aircraft that shot up tanks and bridges and whatnot. And he said, I'll show you some of your work. I'd never seen a bombed out village or town or city. Wesel on the Rhine, we saw it flattened. And then we drove around, he said, I'll show you some of our work. Philips of Eindhoven, where his rocket ships, firing Typhoons had shot out the Gestapo headquarters on the corner of the building of the Philips of Eindhoven. And then he said, then we landed on the golf course at Eindhoven. He said, I'd like to meet a fellow Kingstonian. And there was Group Captain Paul de Vood. Paul de Vood was a friend of my brother's, and his mother and my mother ran the Kingston Music Club. So I'm home free with first-class accommodation at Eindhoven, good food, and I had an opportunity to go to France, but I was too grubby and tired. I hadn't had any sleep for a couple of days, so I asked them to wire our squadron to tell us we were safe, but I don't think it was done. Anyway, I had good accommodations and a flight back to England the next day. So that was a pretty easy trip, really. We flew low over the channel and landed in England. I don't know what aerodrome it was, but next day I was escorted on a special trip to London. We had a sticker on the train carriage, train to London. It was a restricted thing. No one else was on board. I said to the flight lieutenant, I said, what's going on? He said, you're going to be interviewed by military intelligence, MI9. They're the ones who planned our escape routes and our survival gear. He said, they want to talk to you. I said, well, you know who I am. He said, yeah, I know who you are. I don't know how he found out, but probably Group Captain Paul DeVood had something to do with it all. Anyway, I ended up in London with MI9, the military intelligence. They're the ones who planned our escape routes and equipment.
In London, the British had established a secret agency, MI9, to help escapees and evaders. The American equivalent was named MIS-X. Under the direction of Major Christopher Clayton Hutton, MI9 developed a staggering array of secret aids for escapees and evaders. Downed airmen could use convertible fleece-lined flying boots whose side pieces could be removed to become two halves of a vest, leaving a pair of lace-up civilian shoes with a flexible hacksaw blade concealed within them. The airmen were also provided with rustle-free maps printed on silk. MI9 devised a belt buckle which featured a tiny compass, a cigarette lighter which also concealed a compass, a compass was even hidden inside a bottle cork. Smuggled to POWs in their personal mail were items like this rice paper map hidden in a seemingly innocent puzzle game. A chessboard revealed forged documents. Another game board concealed money and a hacksaw blade. Maps were hidden in spools. Or printed on the backs of playing cards.
And they quizzed me for 2 days. Questioned me everything about the trip. How I got a new uniform, and I got new socks and shirts and ties and shoes. I'd lost my boot. One boot was sole came off. So I spent 2 days being interrogated. So then I decided to go across the road to Air Force headquarters, and went in, and there was Corporal Jackson, a friend of the family. And I said, "Now look at, would you check to see if I'm dead or alive?" He said, he came back in about 2 minutes, he says, "You're dead." I said, "Oh great." That meant my family, my parents got the telegram. I said, "Oh, we better send another one." He said, "I'm fine." But it must have been terrible for the family to get these telegrams. It must have been awful, really. But my wife can tell you the end of the story that way, because she just lived down the street. And she went up to see my mother with her older sister. She was only 11 at the time, to sort of sit with my mother. She only told me what it was like only last year. I wouldn't ask her. Must have been awful. Everything happened in that neighborhood over in a week. As Mary will tell you, the week before we got the telegram that Septrinka was missing, and that meant his pilot, another Wickstender paper boy, was missing too in the neighborhood. And then I go missing a few days later, and I think the neighborhood might have been in a bit of an uproar. There were 3 of us missing. Because the other guy missing was a Wickstender paper boy, a bully in the pit. But he did a tremendous job. He collided with a Halifax in France and saved the crew. I didn't see him in the hospital. He wasn't in the hospital when I got back. But a couple of the other paper boys were there, and Septrinka, my customer, one of my customers, lived across the road from my wife. She said it was an interesting week in the neighborhood. Oh God, there are stories that go tie in with it too. And anyway, we got the telegrams out of the way, and only shortly, only a couple of years before my brother died, maybe, he says, "You don't know the rest of the story, do you?" I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Well, I got the same telegrams down in Bournemouth." He was in the repat depot. You're running it. He said, "I got the same telegrams. I was walking through London and I ran into Mort Jackson." Mort says, "So where are you going, Don?" And he says, "I'm going up to the squadron to get Stu's personal effects." He said, "Don't bother." And Don says, "Why?" He says, "I was just talking to him." With that, they adjourned to the pub. He said, "I was just talking to him." So, see, there's stories within stories on these things. And now, of course, you have to bite the bullet and go back to the squadron. And I got treated for trench feet. I must have got wet, but that didn't last long. And then you're sent down to a repat depot, and you're living the life of Riley. But it was embarrassing. And I was with all these people who had just been liberated from prison camps. They were green and yellow and everything else. And I'm stashing away all this good food, bacon and eggs and beef and all the rest of it. And it was kind of embarrassing because they couldn't eat this stuff. They were just learning that the prisoners couldn't handle that food. So I went over across the road to my brother Don. He was running the repat. I said, "Don, this is embarrassing. Can you put me up in your hotel?" He said, "Yeah." He found a room for me in the hotel where he was working. And that's where I stayed for the rest of my leave down in Bournemouth. Now you have to go back home to the mess, and it's pretty quiet, really. Len Berger, the one I told I wasn't going to come back, said, "By the way, I saved your kit." I said, "Why?" Well, he said they started to go through your stuff looking for stuff they might need. And I told them to lay off. And I grabbed your kit. I said, "What did you tell him?" He said, "I told him he'll be back." And I was, within 3 days, you know. He said, "He'll be back." So I'm glad I told him that we were going to run into trouble. But he knew I'd be back. And I call his widow, you know, once a year I try to talk to her. So I've got proof. I know that was what happened. So that was the end of that trip. Fascinating, really, in a way, but nothing compared with my friends and what they've found out what they did, how they won their awards and all the rest of it. So that's why I never told them. I just listened to them. You know, we traveled all over with them. Two of them, two DFC winners, said they're going out to Winnipeg to the reunion in 1984. 3,500 airmen, all aircrew, all over the world out there. I said, "Oh, that's great. You're coming too." I said, "No, I'm not coming. I didn't want anything to do with it." I said, "I'm not registered." "Yes, you are." They had registered me, the two of them. to do a GFC winners. I said, I'm not going out there. I won't know anybody. Where you're going. Amazing. Amazing trip. Honestly. I was registered within 15 seconds. I sat down on a chair, alone. A woman came up to me, says, you're a loner. You'd rather be home. You don't know anybody here. I said, you're absolutely right. Right. She says, where's your home? She knew where my home was. I said, Kingston. She said, you know that fellow over there? I said, yeah. Played football with him in high school. He's a pilot. Done a tour. I had a good chat with him. She says, do you know that big guy over there? I said, that's Wing Commander Ernie Hurlbut from Queens. Good friend of my pilot. Oh, she said, well, then you know somebody here. Ernie says, your skipper went that way. I never did find him till the next day. But I looked over his shoulder. God, there's a guy I've had coffee with for 40 years. At Queens and Morrison's Restaurant. He worked at Empire Life. Neither one of us said we were in the Air Force. And he was a navigator on the VIP flights all over the world, wartime. So there's another one I knew. And then I look over his shoulder. My God, there's the postmaster from Newborough. I put all his kids on paper routes. He's got a DFC and he's been a prisoner of war. And he never said anything to any time I went to Portland to see his kids and talk to them. Never said he was in the Air Force. Of course, I never said anything either. So that's what happened. That's when you meet the great ones, honestly. God, when you meet the Dam Busters, you meet, I got to meet Johnny Johnson, the hero of the Battle of Britain, 38 aircraft. Joe McCarthy of the Dam Busters, the crew from 419 to Victoria Cross, Mynarski crew, got to know them. And you're sitting with the same group, have the Caterpillar Club, but you're sitting with them listening. Somebody said, well, what happened to Guy Gibson, the Victoria Cross winner of the Dam Busters? Well, the report in the paper, he was shot down. No, he wasn't shot down. He screamed he wanted back on ops, so he was flying a Mosquito aircraft in the cloud. He got disoriented and crashed. That's what these guys. So you find these little stories going around. Now I'm taking a whole pile of pictures out in the airfield in Portage la Prairie, and I got a tap on the shoulder. And I look around, it's a Victoria Cross winner, Bill Reed, great guy. I knew how he won the Victoria Cross. He said, look, I've been watching you. You're taking pictures of everybody, and you're not in any one of them. Give me your camera. Give me your camera. So he's taking pictures of me with the guy who sank the cheer pits, because I knew it was bomb hammer, and he's taking pictures of me with these guys. I'm taking pictures of all my heroes. But you wouldn't think he was. Never looked to be a hero. His wife never knew, when he got married, that he'd won the Victoria Cross. That's the kind of a guy he was. Now, all these stories come together a lot in Morrison's Restaurant next door to the Whig Standard in the city. When I walk into a restaurant one day, and there's Group Captain Paul DeVood having coffee at the restaurant. I said, sir, April the 8th, 1945. Who was my pilot that day? I said, I think it's Air Commodore so-and-so, Air Commodore Boyle. He said, I had lunch with him in London 2 weeks ago. Why don't you write to him and get the page out of his logbook? I said, who was it? He said, your pilot that day was Sir Dermot Boyle, Marshal of the RAF. That was your pilot that day. I said, no. Where was the airdrome I took off from the grass field? He says, have you got a German map? I said, yeah. I brought the German map down. He says, there's where you flew out of. And there's where the headquarters of the British Second Army went, right there. And he says, there's where your aircraft crashed. He knew all about me, and I didn't know. He marked my map, told me all about the Air Marshal, Sir Dermot Boyle. So I have bragging rights of my last flight over the Rhine River. It was Air Commodore Boyle, now Sir Dermot Boyle, Marshal. As Paul Dawood said, it's the only one Air Force person could ride a horse in the coronation parade. And then, shortly after, my brother Don walks in. So, there we are, 3 people involved in me and my walk back through Germany. The 3 people involved were all having coffee. And 2 years later, the guy who sent all the telegraphs arrived from London, and we had a great time. So all the people I was involved with on that last trip showed up. We had lots of time, and Morrison's. Paul Dawood knew more about me than I knew about myself. And I figured that's why I ended up in MI9 with the counterintelligence. So that's really my story.